Yo, B-Boy Tech Report. Welcome to this special edition. This is an interview edition of B-Boy Tech Report. Two guys, the producer and the director of I Dream of Wires documentary. Now, this documentary is a very cool documentary because it's all about modular synthesis, and it digs into the differences in the formats between the East Coast philosophy and the West Coast philosophy. And, if you don't know much about modular synthesis, you may not even realize that there is an East Coast philosophy and a West Coast philosophy, or East and West formats. Producer Jason Am, aka Solvent. He also did the music for the soundtrack, and the director Robert Fantinato. And this is this special edition of B-Boy Tech Report interview with I Dream of Wires is sponsored by and brought to you by Pittsburgh Modular. And on that note, let's get to it. Well, let me get started with, how did this all come about? I saw some of the Q&A, but I'm interested to know how you guys got together because, it's a huge feat to bring this up.
You should start it off because he started it himself, and then I came on board kind of into it. So we'll let him.
Okay.
Yeah, I had been in the 80s into electronic music and had some old synths that I hadn't touched in 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it blows my mind when I think about it now that I had this stuff sitting around gathering dust. And I don't know, there was just a point in my life where it just wasn't something that I felt I could do. And when my oldest son started getting interested in electronic music, I told him, I said, I've got these old synths, I'll dust them off. And when I started dusting these things off and cleaning the contacts and all this, I started remembering how much fun they were. And, I started getting into doing music again and getting kind of interested in synths and all that sort of thing. And then I guess the kind of interesting thing that set me off on this modular journey of all things was when my son showed me a picture of a post that Deadmau5 did on his Facebook post about how he had just gotten this Buchla.
Right.
And I remembered the name Buchla from Morton Subotnick. And I was mystified that, is this like an old thing? It looked kind of new, and I was kind of curious, I can't believe people are still making modulars. Mm-hmm. And so I started thinking, and whenever I'm in between commercial projects, I always find it very relaxing and fun to do a little mini documentary I usually self-finance about something I just find fun. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll do something about this. And I found out that there was Bruce Duncan from ModCan had an office in Toronto. That's actually where he's from. Mm-hmm. And so he was my first interview subject. And I really didn't know what this thing was going to be about or who I was going to talk to. I just thought, I could talk to some folks in Toronto and maybe we'll do a few demos. Mm-hmm. And during that time I had discovered, I was getting more and more into electronic music, and I had recalled in the early 90s that I was quite taken by some Aphex Twin music. And so I was searching for more of this, and like a lot of people, I go to YouTube to, listen to stuff that I haven't heard to get a sense of what's out there. And I remember reading the comments. Somebody said in the comments, if you like Aphex Twin, you should check out Solvent. So I did on YouTube, and I was immediately realized this is exactly the music I was looking for. There was something about it, it was melodic. It didn't try to imitate other instruments. It was like straight up synthetic. Yeah. But it had a sort of an uplifting feeling to it. And I immediately, was like a fan immediately. And so I got to know Jason because I couldn't find any of his CDs. It was kind of hard to find his CDs, and I looked up his record label, and I noticed the phone number. The first three digits were a local number.
Oh, wow.
So it was a total fluke. And in fact, when I called Jason up and asked him if I could come down and buy a CD, it ends up we're only like a 10-minute drive from each other's house. So that was how we first met. And when I started kind of thinking about this modular thing, I just on the off chance, I wonder if he uses modular. So I called him up, and we met up for a beer, and I started talking about, maybe you'd be interested in doing some music, and I'll try to see if I can get some modular gear together and set you up at a place for like a week. And so initially and I was all excited about this. I'm like, this is great,
because you're a fan, right?
I'm a huge fan, and he's gonna, he agreed to do this. Mm-hmm. But in the course of just chatting, he started giving me all kinds of advice about, you should talk to this person. You should focus a lot on Eurorack, because I was kind of ignorant about Eurorack, and this stuff was still kind of developing. This was like a few years ago, and during the course of making the film, Eurorack really exploded. So we were kind of there at the right time, and Jason had the right advice, and he seemed to know a lot of people. So I asked him if he'd want to maybe take the role on as the producer, the person to sort of...
Well, that sounds like that's what I was just about to say.
Exactly.
Like your first conversation with him, he became the producer,
Exactly.
basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, basically, not that the direction that the movie was going in before I came on board was interesting, but like one thing that I felt would be kind of a mistake is to try to make like a movie about modulars that's like focusing on like what happened only in the 60s. Because it's kind of hard to portray the story that there's something, that this is like an exciting new technology when you're kind of like, just sitting there talking about these Moog modulars in the 60s and who's using them now. So I was like, I know for a fact that there's many, very hyped up contemporary producers that are like using this stuff. It's like all the time I'm noticing more and more, big techno dance producers that are starting to get, kind of going on. I got really sick of using computers to produce everything, and they're moving more towards, hardware and even modulars. And I was like, this is really the thing, an important thing to get in there to make sure that this movie doesn't seem like some kind of like History Channel thing.
Well, that's one of the things that I was thinking when I was watching it, and when you mentioned that when you introduced the movie, and how he said that you told him about the Eurorack, and as I'm looking at that, I thought, wow, yeah, so it's better. It's like an evolution of the whole thing. So it's historical. It's kind of the evolution of electronic music. Then it comes to what's happening now, and that whole computer music age, which is kind of still here, but there definitely is a resurgence. So with all of that information, I just kept thinking, like, how the hell do you keep it focused?
Yeah. It was tough. I mean, okay, here's one thing. I mean, we originally released this as a 4-hour cut, so
wow.
It was So this is this here at Moogfest was the first screening of the 94-minute version. Okay. But the first thing we did is we released a 4-hour cut because it was like very hard to keep this material focused, because there's, once you kind of get into any kind of technology like that, there's just so many directions that it goes in musically, and the way that different people approach it, it really does become like, whoa, this is
so that's a huge
overwhelming subject matter. Yeah,
I was even surprised to see the beginning historic stuff with the huge electronic instruments bolted down in some university somewhere. That was surprising. It's good that you all included that. I mean,
and that was kind of a fluke that we had gone there, and we didn't really know what to expect, and it actually ended up being such an important part of the film. So sometimes it's by chance, and actually it's kind of a funny story. When we did go to visit Columbia University, one of the things I noticed is people seem to love to talk about this stuff, and we never had much difficulty getting access. Once people kind of saw clips of what we were up to, they got very excited. And when I was talking to Professor Garton, who's the guy who's sort of the caretaker of this monster synth, he seemed a little hesitant. I wasn't sure if I was welcome there. And then I show up, and he's like the nicest guy. And then his assistant, Terry Pender, comes, takes me aside, and he goes, well, Brad this is the first time he's been out of the hospital in months, because he had some major heart surgery, and we thought we were going to lose him. And so he actually made his first trip out of the hospital to come and see us.
Wow.
So that's the kind of thing that,
It's passion.
Yeah, exactly. So people got, it was very cool. So
I wanted to answer to one thing about like going from the beginning to the end. Is like, I think it would be a mistake to kind of, we were originally going to focus more so on the new stuff, like on what's going on now. That was originally what our plan was going to be, just because, like we mentioned, there's so much material that if you open it up to everything, it can get overwhelming. This is a long period of time.
You have to do like series and series of documentaries.
Exactly. So, but I think like really, what we were trying to show is that this was like, the old stuff was almost like an instrument that was like too ahead of its time to really work. Like there was no real music there that suited. I mean, there was a little bit. There was like avant-garde music,
Yeah.
and you know, Keith Emerson and maybe the odd, you know, Beatles track found a way to incorporate, you know, Moog doing a kind of a lead line or something. But it
Yeah.
really, to really get into like exploit what really is special about this instrument, there really was not that much music in the 60s that could have really made use of it. So it was
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
instrument ahead of its time. So it really kind of, you need to kind of show that background to really have the impact of, you know, why this stuff is so big now, because
Right.
now there is, like, you know, you listen to the radio and you listen to, like, you know, whatever, a Justin Timberlake track or whatever, you hear weird sounds
Yeah,
happening,
it's
you
all
know,
over the
there
place,
there is a place for like crazy noises.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, this is why the modular is really I think it was kind of important to show that this was an instrument that, like, these, you know, very ingenious people had the foresight to
It's
see,
decades ahead of it. Yeah,
but
yeah.
but you know, now we're at the point where the music is really out there to really exploit this technology.
That makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, I thought that was a really cool part of the movie, to see it go back. I had no idea. And I learned. And, you know, I mean, the reason I do B-Boy Tech is because people would always come to me and ask for advice on what kind of equipment they should get and how things may work together. And me being an IT person by day and a musician, hip hop artist, and all of that, it just kind of becomes what I do. I talk to people about all technology, right? So I learned stuff, which was cool. So I didn't know that there was sort of a East Coast
Yeah.
philosophy of build and sort of a West Coast philosophy of build. So as I'm looking at it, then I started hearing songs as the documentary was talking about that stuff, because I'm a huge Jay Dilla fan, who's like, you know, he's kind of like the demigod of hip hop beat making and music making.
I know who he is.
Yeah, yes, you know. And I could hear some of his songs, and I could hear like what I assume is like Bukla stuff, and it, you know, and it was right around the time when you were showing the two differences in the philosophies and stuff. So I thought that was cool. I kind of learned from some of that.
Well, I think, you know, what I think is kind of interesting, because at the time, like, these were, you know, geographically very separate locations, but also they were like they were two approaches that, like, didn't really marry, because you either wanted to, like, play, you know,
Yeah,
lead
yeah.
lines that made sense in a kind of musical way, like in pop music or whatever, or you wanted to make like avant-garde,
Right.
bleeping and blooping kind of stuff. But, you know, like I was saying earlier, like, you listen to the radio now, and like sometimes tracks that are huge hits, like their biggest hook is like a very odd kind of like loopy little
Yeah,
sequence,
yeah,
which
yeah.
really is like, it has no like, you could never sit down on a keyboard and imagine that. So
That's
it's
right.
like it's
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
so these two philosophies have like completely come together now, because then over top of that there's a hooky vocal.
Yeah,
You know what I
that's
mean?
true,
Which
that's true.
which was like, you know, you're basically marrying those two philosophies.
Yeah,
But at
yeah.
the time, like, you know, it's interesting how they were like geographically separate, but also like there was no area to like marry those two philosophies.
Right,
But
right.
now
It's all
the music
merged.
world is a
Yeah.
mishmash.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure like Jay Dilla, I don't imagine that he's necessarily using Bukla, but
Yeah.
he's approaching music like, he's not, you know, he's coming up with his results through intuition, rather than through, you know, through experimenting with machines.
Yeah, and then I
rather
mean,
than-
in his hip hop, so there's a lot of sampling going on too.
Yeah.
And he was a master of sampling and chopping,
Yeah.
and so and like a record collection that goes, you know, who knows what in the world he ever sampled.
Yeah.
But it just reminded me when I heard some of the stuff in the thing. I'm thinking like, there's no telling what he touched on, and what he created from scratch too was probably some of that. So yeah, almost innate without realizing.
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
well, you know, when you combine like two samples together, I mean, those two records may not necessarily be in key with each other, but then you can
Right.
throw them in together, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this is just interesting. It doesn't, you know, is it in the key of C or whatever? Like,
Right.
Who cares?
Who cares? Exactly. It sounds
cares?
good,
It doesn't
right?
matter, you know?
Yeah. You know, and that's one of the things that I often ask too when I interview beat makers and musicians and well, beat makers in specific, because we're button pushers, right? And so a lot of times we're not classically trained. Sometimes we are, but a lot of times we're not. And I even talked to, I don't know if you heard of a documentary called Down the Roads about the Fender Rhodes piano.
Oh,
No, I don't know.
I interviewed those guys too. Great guy. I mean, I love the documentary stuff about the history of music equipment. But one of the things I always ask is about whether or not people are classically trained or if they're just in the studio, because I've always had this, this thing like, yeah, I make music. You a musician? Am I? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, button pushing really is the West Coast philosophy.
Yeah,
It's like,
right?
I don't want to have a keyboard because I want to push buttons and not know. I don't want to be thinking in terms of like C, A,
Right.
E sharp, whatever. You don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the improv, the just kind of abstract
Yeah.
way of creating.
I mean, it would like. There's a lot of genres of music where it would ruin it if you had, let's say you had like an MPC or whatever, and it had like what every note was. I mean, it would ruin it because rather than just going like and not even caring about what key it is, just like going based on that is kind of what the a huge part of what the West Coast philosophy was. It was really about like, don't give me these keys.
It's kind of like establishment and anti-establishment.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have this musician's philosophy, and maybe it's the establishment, and they're kind of elitist about the thing.
Yeah.
And then you have this like outskirts of the establishment, the underground of the whole thing. It's like, we're gonna make these sounds, and it's gonna be fresh, and we're gonna enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
That's
Those two music philosophy, those two synthesizer philosophies are really like, they can translate into so many areas of music making in general, like just music making philosophy in general. I mean, I am totally with you on that idea of like, are you a musician? It's kind of like,
yeah. Now we got to talk about this thing. Now we got to go see the wizard and decide who's the musician and who's not.
Well, I think Morton Sabatnik was very prescient when he imagined a future where people would have tools that allowed them to be musical, but they didn't come from a musical background. And he kind of, Silver Apples of the Moon, it seems kind of obvious, and you think, oh, he was there at his apartment with some real machines and a synth. And then you realize, like, this is kind of the first recording by a bedroom producer.
Yeah,
in a way.
right.
So he kind of
Which
imagined,
I thought was dope
Yeah.
to put that in. I thought that was really fresh to see that and in the context of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And you never think about that.
I mean, he literally, like, if you read up on him, I mean, he touched on it in the documentary, but, if you read up on him more, he really, like, before he ever had the tools, which, for him, the tools were the Buchla synthesizer. Before he had the tools, he envisioned this idea of there being, he called it like a studio sound art, studio sound art.
Yeah.
I'm not a musician. I'm a studio sound artist.
That's so fresh. I love that.
And that, it's like he envisioned, what basically, there's so many genres of music that are now.
Yeah.
That's all that it is.
Yeah, and I love the idea that he said where he wanted kind of like a easel for musicians. Yeah,
so
music
just
easel type of stuff.
I mean, they literally called that instrument. There was a Buchla music easel.
Okay.
That was an actual, and it came from this idea that he thought, I'm pursuing this idea of being a studio sound artist. So he really was. So an easel is like, here's my palette of colors. Or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. That's really, it's eye-opening. Without a doubt. So we're doing this documentary. What do you guys think is your biggest accomplishment in completing this documentary, or is that the accomplishment in itself?
Well, I think figuring out a way to organize it, that was a huge. One of the problems we ran into is knowing when to stop shooting, because we, as we got more and more ambitious, we thought, oh my gosh, we really should talk to this guy. We should talk to this, this woman, this man, this organization. And we started, then we sat back and we thought, wait a minute, we've got like 100 interviews. I mean, who shoots a documentary with 100 interviews? And then it became clear, okay, the fun's over now, and we need to sit down and figure out what's the story.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest accomplishment, and that took a long time to finally figure out. And I guess it was the realization that we had enough material to tell that chronology. When we suddenly realized, yeah, we can actually tell the story starting from the beginning. I think that was, when we realized, yeah, we actually accomplished something here. We kind of became, the storehouse of this story. And I still feel like, we've got this big archive of material that I feel maybe 500 years from now, when people want to tell the story of electronic music, they'll be able to draw on all these interviews that we've got. That a lot of it isn't in the doc, but it's valuable. We almost felt like we've created this archive now that's almost more important in a way than the film. And anyway, for me personally, that's that's the thing I was pretty proud of.
Well, when I talked to the guys that did the Fender Rhodes documentary, and I mean, I love the Fender Rhodes, the sound of it. They did the documentary, and then someone told them, like, so what are you going to do with all of this footage? You got like tons and tons of interviews. I mean, just everybody, George Duke to whoever. I mean, just anybody and everybody who's ever used the Fender Rhodes. And then they were like, well, we're going to chop it down and make this documentary. So they did.
Yep.
And then they ended up, somebody asked them, like, but you should immortalize it in a book. So then they wrote a book, and that allowed them to put more of the information into a book. Because, a book, obviously, it can be thick, and there's a lot of information. It's just like the reverse. When you make a book into a movie, a lot of that gets lost.
It's funny you mention
Right,
that.
yeah.
It's funny you mention that because
Is that in the plans or in the works or anything?
it's more about my struggle because I'm kind of a little bit late in the game getting into the creative side of filmmaking because my background is mostly technical editing. I used to run a business renting gear, and so it's only fairly recently that I've kind of taken the plunge and started being creative. And what I found was the hardest struggle for me was to think in terms of a film format rather than a book. And so I've done some of the projects where I've been trying to do too much, and I realized that sort of depth is really great in a book, and with a film you've got to trim down, right? So I never actually thought about doing a film, but we are thinking about other plans and more of a series type thing. Okay. So I think when you're like you mentioned, there's topics there that are good for an entire episode of a series.
Yeah,
so we are. That's kind of our next step.
Well, that excites me. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting just to hear that. 'Cause, I mean, this was a good movie. I mean, like I said, I make beats, and I'm all about the synthesizers. And the more I learned about the older synthesizers and stuff, and then I recently got a Mini Moog Voyager.
Yep.
And all I know is that's going to be the gateway drug into modular, and I'm a little afraid of that. Like you guys touched on it. So let me ask you, why do you think that modular is such an addictive thing? Why does it have that kind of effect on people?
Well, I mean, it's
Well, you're an addict. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm an addict, so I mean, there's probably tons of different reasons, but I'll tell you one reason right off the bat is like, if you buy a Mini Moog Voyager, that's going to set you back, right? You're setting you back a lot of money. That's a big investment right there, right?
Yeah.
Now with a modular, you can kind of, you can go, okay, well, I got to pick all these different components, and you can kind of personalize it for, I like this type of filter on this synth, so I'm going to get a clone of this kind of Roland filter for here, and I really like these types of like envelopes that this company does, and these, let's say you really love like the Mini Moog's envelopes, and you want like a module that they say their envelopes are kind of modeled after the Mini Moog.
Right.
So you can kind of put this thing together, and then you can. But it's with a Mini Moog, you'd be like, okay, I'm done. I bought that synth. There's not like plug in the expander.
You're not pulling that out of there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But this, that's not the case, right?
Yeah,
It's like this filter is pretty good, but there are times where it would be cool if this, if instead I had like an Oberheim type of a filter, or what if like, you see some YouTube video about like, some crazy like digital distortion module that's like really going to open up some different things that you wouldn't get inside of your normal synths, and so it just like it's these small investments, right? I mean, they're not super small; they're still like a couple $100,
right?
But you can sometimes go, I'm bored of this filter right now, so I'll sell this filter for like, I'll sell it for like 80% of what I bought it for, or whatever. Like, I sell it for 150, and then I'll buy this new filter for 200.
And now you're reloaded.
You're reloaded, so it's like it's just like okay. let's put it this way. I mean, you know, everyone that has access to plugins, do they just go, yeah, I'm satisfied with all the plugins I have right now? Never, right?
Never.
You're going to be like, oh, there's one for me to grab right
That's
now.
right.
You're
That's
going
right.
to grab it, right?
And
okay.
when a new one comes out, it always feels like nothing else matters until you get
Yeah,
that one.
exactly. So there you go. This
Right.
is the hardware equivalent of that, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's never just like, you know, it's not like you're going to have to buy a new Mini Moog Voyager or something, or, you know, brand new big polysynth that you know you're going to have to commit to this machine and kind of be into it as a whole. You can basically sort of like, you're always wanting to augment it with the latest and greatest, or thinking if only, you know, yeah.
Yeah, you can let your imagination run wild with it. So you think that's why there's this huge resurgence with the Eurorack stuff? And when I say that, I'm speaking of like the people that make them. Like,
I think there's
I
just,
mean, there's so many.
well, you know, I think personally, it's just like, you know, I've been buying synths for like 20 years. Like I've been, you know, I'm a huge like vintage analog synth freak. Like I've been buying. I'm a gear like I'm a gear addict like in general, right? So synth gear. So modular stuff is pretty new to me. But like I'm finding with a lot of these modules now, you know, I'm getting a little bit. You can kind of hear those sounds everywhere now. Do you know what I mean? Like, it used to be like hearing like a big fat Mini Moog bass line was like not that common, but now it's like everywhere.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like on Britney Spears records or whatever. You know,
true.
so it's like I just feel like, you know, all these synth sounds have become they're so prominent everywhere that I really like. I'm really hungry right now for like something that's gonna give me that excitement about
Something new,
like wow, like this. I've never heard anything like what I'm doing right now. It sounds really weird. You know, I don't really know how to incorporate this into music, but I haven't heard anything like this. Like that's, you know,
And which is good. That inspires creativity.
yeah, I
though,
crave
right?
that. You know, I crave that, finding like sounds, even if it's like too weird for me to incorporate it into a song, it's still like kind of research. Just like reminding yourself that there are sounds left out there that can surprise you. You know, so I'm just finding like that there's like the modular manufacturers are like really tapping into that and realizing there's people that want it as weird as I can think of it. I mean, they're not going like, I'm not going to make it. They're not like basically tapping into something that they're not into. They love designing crazy stuff. It's like, I think they all kind of like challenge each other. You know, to like come up with like,
that's an interesting.
they're kind of in a race with each other to like come up with like the most wild stuff, and they know that there's going to be, you know, it's not like, you know, Roland has to be pretty sure that if they're going to manufacture a product that like 100,000 people need to buy it to make this financially viable.
That's right.
But like this guy can make like 100 modules, and if he sells 70, then he's done like really well with it. You know what I mean? Because the whole like investment and everything is pretty small. And it's just like there's a hungry market for this, and you know, there's a boutique industry to support it. You know, it's like it's big enough yet small enough that, you know, like
which
Trent
makes
Reznor
a pretty
says
interesting community out of the whole
Trent
thing.
Reznor says in the film, like, you know, they don't need to run it by a board of directors who are going to like whittle it down into something that like the masses will be able to stomach. They can just say, I think this is awesome. You know, I want this thing that makes everything sound like Atari, you know, like it's based on like say like an Atari Zaxxon fire sound. I think I want this for my music, and if I want this for my music, I bet there's like at least 50 people that do. And that's enough.
Like, was it Make Noise? The guy from Make Noise in the documentary where he said, I built so many of these things and they sold out in 12 hours. That's crazy.
So he has low expectations. A lot of these guys have low expectations, and then, you know, sometimes it's turning out that the demand is like way bigger than they expected.
I mean, on a practical note as well, you know, one of the hardest things to do as a manufacturer is the case and the power supply, because power supplies have to pass all kinds of certification, and there's a big expense involved there. when you've got IDOW for basically creating the standard, all these guys really need to do is to make the circuit board. It plugs into an already existing power supply, and they just make a faceplate.
Right.
They don't have to deal with all this other stuff that adds the huge amount of expense. They can concentrate on the actual circuit and the creativity and the interface, and leave all that other stuff that's already been done for them, right? So that means anybody, well, like Stacy Hexenberger, for example. Things are just going crazy with him right now, but he's incredibly creative, and he just comes up with all these ideas, and he started very, very small. And you hear this story all the time, that because you don't need to deal with all these things that require lawyers and testing, so I think that's really, that's Dieter
So
Doppler.
it's taken away all of the hard stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It left it to all of the fun stuff for people that are developing and stuff. That's an interesting thing. So are there any modular makers or synth modular makers of note that you guys can say that's one to watch, or these guys are probably going to be the next big thing or something like that?
I think Make Noise. They're from here.
Yeah.
They're from Nashville. They're probably I guess maybe Doper, who started that Eurorack format, may still be bigger, but they're kind of like they kind of fill in all the kind of vanilla stuff, whereas Make Noise is like all the you shouldn't say all the weird. They have kind of vanilla stuff too, but they really have like a whole esoteric philosophy with the way that the things look. Like, it doesn't look like any other module you've seen before. Like, they're almost kind of reinventing the way that you look at it. Like, interface is so important, and it's not like, it wouldn't be like just cut off on the filter knob with just like small font. It would be like looking all like a graffiti artist or something.
Okay.
Like it's and I think that really has a big
that's cool.
It has a big impact on the way you like interact with the instrument when they kind of have a really like, it's kind of that Buchla West Coast philosophy thing, and I think that is an inspiration for them. I know like a lot of what's behind the hood is kind of Buchla influence with them, but I think even Buchla didn't do this wild graphic stuff, but I think it is a Buchla West Coast philosophy approach to kind of say, we're going to take you away from your like expectations. So we're not going to call the filter cutoff frequency cutoff. It's going to be like this weird symbol, or it's not quite a symbol. It may say cutoff, but it may be hard to read, and it just looks all like, when you look at it, it just gives you this like strange, like the name of the company is Make Noise, and that's kind of like, just make noise. Just make noise. Like, have fun, make some noise. You know what I mean? Like, well, I think they're an important one. There's so many of them, but so I don't want to pick out.
Watch for
I think they're really exciting, and I think like I'm seeing a lot of musicians coming from outside of electronic music starting to notice them. I think.
Yeah.
Well,
I actually just being here, I met two people that bought Make Noise modulars while here.
Now, if you're not into that sort of philosophy, there's actually a little side business that people run making alternative faceplates for Make Noise modules.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah, so if you want a straightforward interface, but you want the Make Noise technology, you can take their faceplate off and stick this thing that looks like just lab equipment.
Wow.
If you're like, I can't deal with this like crazy stuff. I want it to look like, I want it to say cut off. I don't want it to be like cut off.
Right.
That's more the kind of stuff I like. I like the sort of scientific thing. So for me, I've never been able to afford ModCan stuff, the big full-size stuff, but Bruce has started making Eurorack now, and so I love his stuff. It just looks like lab equipment, and that's kind of the aesthetic I personally like.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think ModCan now, they're making these forays into Euro, and I find his stuff is it's mostly digital.
Okay.
But it's so well thought out. I don't know. That's my personal favorite anyway.
What do you guys think about, because you talked about computer music and how that all evolved, like there was an erosion of the modular analog world into computer music, and now there's a resurgence of the modular analog world. But I went to a dub spot course while I've been here, this little talk, where one of the guys would use an Ableton Live and a plugin, I think, called Silent Waves.
Oh, yes.
To incorporate your hardware stuff into your DAW. What do you guys think of that kind of thing?
I mean, I use that
Do you
myself.
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, there's basically, it's modular, and it also that not only refers to it in and of itself, it also refers to how you choose to interact with it. I mean, you can go and do this precision, like, people, if you're used to the precision of plugins and you don't want to deal with like all this kind of weird sequencers and stuff that are maybe a little too off the beaten path from your way of thinking or whatever, you can like sequence this stuff using Ableton Live or Logic or whatever, using this silent way, and I think that's great if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
There's other people that are like, every time I'm near a computer, it like sucks. It's like I touch the keyboard
Right.
and my inspiration like gets drained into the
Right.
keyboard. It's just like it's how you approach it is like modular too. You can like, there's people that will never want to integrate it with a computer.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
people that totally will want it. They want it. They want to control it just like they've gotten used to controlling plugins and stuff like that. But they also want like the sound and the fun of the hardware in front of them or whatever.
Right.
And then there's people that like myself. I go back and forth between those two ways of thinking. I mean, sometimes I make abstract music, sometimes I make melodic music, sometimes I make abstract music with melodic components.
Right.
Depends on what the application is. It's gonna be. They're both great for me. I like moving between those two, and
Okay.
personally.
You did the soundtrack for the
Yeah.
documentary too, right? Did you? What was your tool set for the documentary, or did you just kind of, like you just said, kind of jump around? Between
No, I didn't. I mean, I did 100% modular for the soundtrack.
Wow, nice. Okay.
Thanks. I mean,
Apropos.
yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, but even like the drum sounds and stuff, I didn't use any drum machines or samples
Really?
and stuff. I synthesized all the kick drums and.
Very nice, man. I was actually, when I was looking at the thing, I was thinking like, wow, some of those drums are really hitting. I mean, it's
Yeah.
good stuff, man. Good
Cool,
stuff. I
thank
mean,
you.
to think that you designed those drums from modular and analog.
Yeah,
That's-
I mean, I've got like samplers, and I've got
Yeah.
an 808,
Yeah.
lots of drum machines. Where if I, there was times where I was like, oh man, I have to like still do, like I set myself this challenge, like I'm gonna do it all modular because that's kind of the point of this, right?
Yeah.
So it was also kind of to show, like when I'm having when someone's asking me like this, a lot of people think, all you're gonna get out of modulars is just like bleepy bloopy, experimental nonsense.
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to be able to like have this thing to say, like, you heard the soundtrack, there's beats there's melodies, and I did all that with the modular. It's not necessarily ideal. Like there was times where I was like, man, it would be really great to just plug in the
that drum
808,
machine, right?
get that 808 in there, rather than sitting there like, oh, this kick is like almost there, but what,
Right. Yeah.
So, it's not ideal, but like, I set myself the challenge, so I wanted to do it. But
That's
I
a
mean,
cool
I would
challenge.
definitely, thanks. I mean, I definitely, I haven't worked on music since the soundtrack was finished too much because I've just been busy like promoting the film and stuff. But
Yeah.
I know, when I get back into producing again, I'm looking forward to just like being able to fire up the 808.
Right. Yeah.
But use it alongside the modular. But there's some things modular is great for, and other things where, it's a little more work than it needs to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the part that I get nervous about when I think about giving it to modular. Like, being a technician too by trade is you could get caught up into the technical end of things, and I could easily see days being sucked away tweaking and never making music.
Well, that
You know
that
what
was that was literally part of the modular soundtrack thing too, because I wasn't heavily into modulars before I got involved in the thing. I had kind of borrowed some, and I'd had like little systems that I'd actually sold off because of what you're talking about. Because I found myself going, I could trade this for this, and I'm going like, oh man, I just spent a whole day like thinking about configurations. This is not conducive. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this modular soundtrack, but like, it's good that I have this like something that needs to be done here, because if I don't get this work done, then this film has no soundtrack. You know what I mean?
The raw tracks are done in like a 1 week stint, right?
Not quite.
Well,
I did a bunch of, kind of laid the foundations for a bunch of tracks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like I needed to like, it was good to have this like, this goal that needed to be met.
Yeah,
I mean, nobody
right.
was, nobody was like, you know, nobody was forcing me to get it done, but
Yeah,
I knew,
yeah.
okay, this film.
But you all had a project that you
exactly.
did,
I was like,
yeah.
the film's, you know, film's got to have the soundtrack. This is what I committed to do. So, you know, it's good to have that goal so that I don't get like lost in the rabbit hole of just like, oh wow, that sounds
Right,
great,
right.
you know, and just like going into a synth nerd trance.
Right,
you
right,
know?
right. Yeah, you look up as days pass, it's
Yeah.
like the apocalypse is already happening. Like what?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah, I thought all those bombs and stuff going off were part of my sound.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I thought every time I pull this one,
that's-
right?
I don't know what's going on. Stuff sounds 3D. I hear like sounds all around me.
That's cool stuff, man. So if somebody came to you and they said, I know nothing about modular, I want to get into it, how would you advise them? Like, maybe you can go in this direction. Like, what would be that advice you would give them?
I mean, I would say like, what, you know, why is it that you want to get into modulars? Because I don't really, you know, necessarily think that it's for everybody.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
like. I think depending on the kind of music you do, it's not like I don't believe that modulars is for everybody at all.
Yeah,
I think that it kind of depends on what your goals are.
What your
You know, I think
end game
that if you were like a cutting edge producer and you were kind of trying to like stand out and you're feeling like this might give you an edge, I would say yes, this does give you an edge. So I mean, I would probably like point to a few. You know, there's a few Euro rack manufacturers that make kind of like preset systems. I don't
That
mean
brings to mind
what I
Pittsburgh
mean is,
Modular
yeah,
in my
exactly.
mind.
Pittsburgh Modular, Make Noise does as well on the more weird end. But I mean, so you don't have to go, okay, blank case, what do I put in there? They've already kind of thought about that, and I think that you could at least start there and go, you know, this isn't really the filter I would choose. Well, you can just pop it out. Like they're preset, they're not preset, but pre-configured systems.
Yeah.
But you're not locked.
Yeah.
That's modular. You're not locked in.
Nice.
You can switch it out. So I think that's a good way to
approach it.
and
yeah.
I'd kind of ask them like, what's your background? Because if you came from, you know, using like classic synths or whatever, you might have a hard time dipping straight in to make noise or something like that. You might be better off with something like Pittsburgh because it's going to like give you the ideas of modulars, but it's still like all those components are very, very kind of straight up,
Yeah,
typical synth, you know.
It's just so cool to think. I mean, because from an outsider looking in, you look at modular, and it's just kind of like all that is just what it is. Everything is everything. That's the world of modular. But then, like I said, learning from what you guys are talking about and what was in your film, that you start to see that there's different philosophies and kind of different roads that happens once you get in there. You kind of look at it, maybe like when you look at a spider web. It's a spider web. You get close on it, and there's all of this intricate stuff that's going on. You know?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, but I definitely, you know, I think a lot of people that I know that make electronic music and they knew that I was doing this documentary or whatever, they, you know, assume that I would say, oh, you got to get into modulars, and I don't think that that's true at all. I don't think it's for everybody. You know, it definitely depends on what your goals are. Like if you want to make like straight up synth pop, and all you want is like sounds that go like dun, dun, you know, Kraftwerk type stuff.
Yeah, right.
If you just want like straight melodic, bleepy little melodies and fat bass lines or whatever, you'd probably do just fine with, you know, a mofo and a you know,
Microbrood or something.
yeah, and a microbrood or something.
Right,
So it's
right.
not, it's, you know, it kind of depends on the kind of sounds you're after. If you're
Right.
if you're after just straight up synth sounds, I mean, it's kind of just more work on a modular to get those sounds, you know. So
Yeah,
why?
and you definitely got to be up to the work.
Yeah, yeah,
But you know, I always feel though that modular is not even a type of instrument. In some ways, it's a way of thinking. So you can be modular with guitar pedals. You can start thinking in a modular way with traditional synths, rather than thinking them as individual, you know, synths. They've got outputs and inputs that you can patch into, and so people can kind of think modular without necessarily getting the quote modular system.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
know
about
what?
experimentation.
I watched I was on you guys' YouTube channel, and
Yep.
there was an extended, and I can't remember which one because I watched several of them, and there was an extended interview there, and I think one of the guys spoke about that. He's like, well, here's an
that's
effects
Sean.
pedal here, and then there's this modular here, but then he had this thing and that thing. He's like, that whole desk is my, like everything over there by that thing is my modular system,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, that's an interesting philosophy.
Yeah, you could certainly, just that spirit of not being afraid to connect one thing to another. They make it a little easier with a modular because the connectors are in front, right up in front. But you can get behind most older synths and get into the guts of it as well.
And then getting into, how you all did the film, what was the experience like with crowdfunding?
It was pretty rocky.
Yeah.
I mean, it was definitely. I mean, we had no other choice, right? We tried to approach like any kind of. I mean, we applied for some filmmaking grants and things like that. We didn't get anywhere with any of that stuff because if you kind of explain this concept, they're like,
Right. Exactly.
you're telling me that there's going to be like more than 20 people that want to see a film about like people
So
plugging.
you want to make a film for you and your buddies?
Yeah, exactly. For you and a bunch of nerds. Oh yeah, okay, sure. Maybe there's 100 other nerds like you out there, but like I'm not giving you any money for that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So you had to kind of go to those nerds, which is what Indiegogo was. Well, Indiegogo it's like Kickstarter.
Right.
But like, it's kind of easy to just say, we're gonna make this film, and you're gonna get this DVD, and here, give us the money or whatever. And we fulfill. There's a lot that don't end up taking the money and nothing ever happens. And I could totally see that happening. I'm not saying that we were ever that was ever a real danger for us, but like when it actually came to the time to like, oh, now we have like 2,000 DVDs to ship out, and we had like as an option like T-shirts, and I'm like, okay, so like 250 people ordered T-shirts, and now I've got to like email all those people and find out what size they are. And it was just like it was
suddenly running a business.
It was right all of a sudden.
Well, this is what I'm saying. When you think of it, you're just like, oh yeah, put up this perk, $30 for T-shirt, sure, like
simple enough.
We'll do that when it happens. It's going to be a while. So it was like.
Then that moment comes.
It's like, oh my god. And then all these people, because obviously like a film takes a lot longer than you ever think it's going to. So it's like all these people like, I paid for this like a year and a half ago. Like, are you guys ever like, and it was like an immense pressure.
I can imagine.
Like people, like literally, I was like scared to check my email because there would be like these people like, what every day, like asking me where is this film? When's it coming or whatever.
Well, see that's what because I noticed some things in the film. You guys were at NAMM 2012 or 2013, right?
No, it was 2012.
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I noticed that because I saw something that was new that came out that year, and I was there at the press day.
Right.
And dude's holding up the little thing.
Right.
Oh, that though. No, you know what? That was actually from a NAMM.
They provide some B-roll.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
That one we didn't actually film. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that might have been 2013. You can grab a NAMM, like, what do they call
press
it?
kit.
Electronic press kit.
Okay.
They're saying you can use this stuff in whatever.
Yeah.
So that's what that is.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, see that. Well, what that made me think is like, wow, they've been making this thing for a long time, but it's even longer than I imagined.
It is long. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I can tell you the exact day. It was November 2010 that I did very first, like push the record button for the first time. And that's a long time. And I almost feel like today is the end almost because we showed it for the first time. We showed the cut that's out there for the general public in a public forum. And so, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Today's kind of like
a long time to keep focus and
it's tough.
and follow through with all that.
Well,
it's a huge accomplishment.
I actually have to say that I think Jason had it worse than me because there came a certain point where I started working on some other project and I had to walk away from this for a good 6 months, and Jason had to take the brunt of dealing with figuring out the logistics of like shipping shirts and where are we going to show this thing.
like
He's
so
like,
we-
I thought I was just gonna be making music.
yeah. So
Like
the
a drum
producer.
machine sounds.
so the
gotta produce.
the Indiegogo like the Indiegogo fulfillment part,
Wow.
right? Like so I told you, it seemed all fine and dandy to say like, oh yeah, shirts, DVDs. When it's done, it's like so far off into the distance. It's like
Right,
you're
right.
just like, yeah, when that happens, it'll be no problem. And like as these orders are coming in, I'm not being like super awesome with how I'm like keeping track of, you know what I mean? I'm not like
yeah.
meticulously.
spreadsheet in my thing,
I'm not
all this
meticulously entering them into some spreadsheet or something. I was just like, oh yeah, I'll figure it all out when it comes or whatever. And then like this when it came time to ship these orders, luckily my like next door neighbors went out of town because I couldn't even have like done this in my house. It was so much. Like we sold a lot. So I mean,
Yeah.
this was an expensive film to make. I mean, not compared to like other real films. I mean,
Yeah.
compared to real films, like our budget was probably like a normal catering budget or something.
right.
But like it wasn't. It cost us like a fair amount of money to travel around and do all that stuff.
Right. Yeah,
But we did well with Indiegogo, but that meant a lot of DVDs. So I literally, my next door neighbor's house, they were out of town. They were like, you can use the house or whatever.
Wow.
There was like, I had a whole floor of their house that was like from floor to ceiling, like garbage bags of packages, because some of them were shirts and, so it was like, I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
And you could have never had any clue that it would be that way.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Interesting.
No.
That's-
I mean,
Well, we're
even-
not in that business, so I
Yeah,
don't really
of
know
course.
what 1,000 shirts looks like
right.
Yeah.
in packages.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, when we were struggling to get all this stuff out, somebody sent us an email saying like, who does your PR? Like, what's up with you guys? Like, you need to talk to your staff. Like, we're some big production company. I'm like, it's just Jason and I, and that's it, right?
Well, that's what I find with the
This is a
internet.
homegrown thing.
People will think that it's
It's a mega corporation.
right.
Well, it's a compliment, though, right?
Yeah,
It's a
it is. It's a
compliment.
huge compliment
Yeah,
when
'cause
that
it may-
happens.
you know-
you're doing a lot of things right at that point.
Yeah, because they're looking at this
Well,
and thinking like
perceive
there
it
must be like a whole bunch of people involved in this. Usually on a documentary like this, it would be like cinematographer,
Yeah.
sound, whatever. And if you look at our credits, it's kind of like Robert Fantinato,
It's like when a
Jason
kid makes a
Am,
movie.
Robert Fantinato, Jason Am. You know what I mean? There's
It's
and then
almost
there's a
easier
few. There's
to
a
put the names and then all the jobs.
yeah.
So true.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, no, there was other people doing some other stuff, but I
Right,
mean,
right.
we were the ones who like put in like the ridiculous amount of time.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, when you asked me earlier about what I was most proud of, I think also, what ended up being in front of the camera, it didn't get betrayed by the fact that it was just two of us. I think we managed to keep the quality level high enough so that when people were watching, I think this Indiegogo thing. One of the reasons why I think people had confidence in buying, helping us with this, is that we would release, little extended interviews, and they looked good.
Yeah.
I have to say that we managed. The sound was good, the image was nice and clean, and it didn't betray the fact that it was just like a two-man operation. So yeah, that
Kept a
that
level
felt
of
good.
quality there.
And
so.
I guess when people watched it, they were like, "Oh, this is going to be good." So they had some confidence in us.
Yeah. Well, that was smart too. To
Yeah.
do that, to kind of, keep people pulled in and reined in, interested in what's
Yeah.
going on. So
It's hard to know.
I can imagine if there's no YouTube and there's no information coming along, and there's a 2-year gap. People are like, this is never happening.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, it was definitely like there was a lot, we would put out these extended interview clips, and then there were people like, oh, they know that we have like an interview with some musician they like let's say they're a big Depeche Mode fan, and we got this Vince Clarke guy from Depeche Mode. They're like, put out the Vince Clarke one. I'm like, we're not just going to start throwing
The
you
whole
every
movie.
free,
right.
But we would save, like I saved, the Trent Reznor one for like a real pivotal time, like where like basically what it was is it was like I'm for getting people to order it right before Christmas. So we like released this Trent Reznor clip like a few weeks before Christmas, so that like Pitchfork and all these other sites like picked up on it.
Right.
And then like then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I don't know this documentary, and then they check out the main trailer, and then like we got a flood order. So
Wow.
just say I did definitely make an effort to sort of like pick key moments to like
Yeah, timing
release
is
these things to
everything.
keep the momentum, but also not flood it so that it's like so that they get kind of spoiled into thinking this is just free stuff for me
Right,
whenever I
right.
want it. Like you gotta
Wow. Yeah.
you gotta keep them hungry and keep them aware that this is that this is not just like a fountain of like this is work. Like putting it on YouTube for you
Yeah.
is not paying any bills.
Right, right, exactly.
Well, I
and
mean,
I think that's what people get used to on
Yeah.
the internet. The internet is the internet. It's all free for all, right? Let's
Yeah.
go.
I mean, I never want to disparage anyone who attempts to make a documentary, and it's so much easier now with technology and DSLRs and stuff. But my background's actually in film. I mean, I used to shoot motion picture film. I used to edit film by hand. So I thought it was important that people understood that it's not just a YouTube video with a shaky camera and bad sound, that this is going to be a quality thing.
Yeah.
Even though it's just two guys, I mean, I do work in the professional field, so I'm able to bring those skills. And,
Right,
and so what we pour out into it really was just a lot of unpaid work that we did over the course of 3 years, right? So it's and I would, agonize over every cut in the editing. So this was something that was really, we put a lot of effort into, and it was going to look good, and we wanted to make sure people knew that. So.
yeah, yeah. So, this has been a special presentation of B-Boy Tech Report. And incidentally, this presentation of B-Boy Tech Report, the extended interview of the producer and director of I Dream of Wires, has been brought to you by Pittsburgh Modular. And we out. B-Boy Tech Report, Pittsburgh Modular, I Dream of Wires. Be easy.